Thank you, Justin, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone's G'd up post-lunch for this next session, which is going to focus on some really critical ESG-related questions. So predominantly, how ready is your business in terms of ESG, and looking at your supply chain, thinking about, well, in terms of your suppliers, are you getting from them what you need in order for you to be ESG ready? And in terms of your customers, are you meeting the standards they're expecting of you? So when we talk about ESG, well, it means a raft of things to different people. But what we're talking about here is environmental, social, and governance issues. And as I say, means different things to different businesses. And so we're really fortunate today that we've got 3 really esteemed panel members who are going to be sharing their wealth of knowledge and experience from their respective businesses. And hopefully the audience here sharing some really valuable insights into what their expectations are in terms of their supply chain, in terms of being ESG and compliance ready. So you may be questioning, why on earth we've got a lawyer here? Do not panic. I'm not here to bore you to tears with the intricacies of ESG regulation as much as I enjoy reading about it, but it is really important to bear in mind that the expectations and the requirements of your value chain, that they exist essentially because it's not just because it's a morally right thing to do and good for business, but because behind all of this, there is a really fast evolving regulatory landscape that is essentially forcing businesses to take action now. And some of you in this audience may feel like you're too small, you're not actually going to be caught by a lot of this regulation, but rest assured, if you've got anybody in your value chain that is in fact going to be caught, the chances are they're going to be flowing those down to you, so you do need to be ready. So what I would say is that there are businesses starting to act with a bit of trepidation, a bit of concern about this ESG regulation, this maelstrom of regulation that we're all facing at the moment. But it's not doom and gloom. I'm really confident this next session, no pressure panellists, but will provide some really good insights, some guidance and some useful tips as to how to get ESG ready and hopefully inspire you all to take the opportunities that ESG readiness presents in terms of both innovation, growth and leadership in the automotive industry. So without further ado, while we have a clip playing, I'd like to invite on stage our panellists. We've got Alex, Reuben and Eman.
ESG regulation requires strategic rather than a purely operational response. And businesses are increasingly realising that it doesn't just sit within one area of its business, but rather ESG ought to be permeating its entire business. What is clear is that you need to dedicate both time and resource to ensure that you can navigate the change and the shifting landscape.
Similarly, you have to cast the ESG lens over every decision you make, because if you don't embed it at every level in the business, and it's not a strategy at all, it's just a bunch of nice ideas.
So the most critical area that a supply chain company can focus on is the supply chain transparency. The key reason is if you don't know where your suppliers are, how are they making things, then we can't really be clear on the ESG credentials of that supplier, which means ultimately we can't be clear on the credentials for our components as well, because they all come together for one product for our customers.
By integrating ESG principles into our operations, we're not only aligning ourselves with the global sustainability goals, but also driving positive change within our industry.
That's great. So hopefully there's some introductions briefly on screen there, so we're going to get straight into it. So thank you everybody that has been filling out the QR codes and answering the questions. So we're going to cut straight to the first answer in terms of how ready is your business on the ESG front. So could we have the results, please? So we can see here we've got 42% of yes, it will be fine, 35% of yes, it is already. We have 13% saying no, and I think that's a couple of percent, say 8% saying don't know, not relevant. So perhaps okay, I could come to you first, Reuben, to talk about what your initial views is on those results.
Thank you. When I look at those results, I'm a bit surprised, if I'm honest. I would probably expect the number to be lower for ready or will be ready, because there is so much complexity in this space that actually we find it difficult to be clear on every single piece of legislation, exactly when are we going to be ready, or have we got everything in place. And I've got some really smart people working in the team for us at the minute, and it does worry me. So I think to see a high number is good. I think that shows positive intent. That will say there's definitely action. But the concern is it's almost the unknowns there potentially for some businesses that maybe is a bit of a risk.
Great. Perhaps if we come to you, Alex.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think the results are probably predictable, but I think what's good about seeing results that look like that is that there's no sort of intrinsic arrogance or complacency within the sector. It's like, yeah, okay, it's a complex environment and there's a lot to do, and there's an acknowledgement that there's a lot to do. I think that if everybody said, yeah, we're ready, it's fine, it's great, everything's superb, then that would probably be indicative of a little bit of complacency. So it's great to see that there isn't any.
Great. And anything from yourself, Eman?
I'm surprised with the result, I have to say. I thought it would be lower. Our experience, actually, as a Tier 1 supplier is great when you're talking about companies who are bigger than 20,000 employees. The Tier 2 plus are really struggling. And we have to say as well that the sustainability is not scope 1 and 2. I think the majority of us probably will be able to do it. Is the minute you're talking about scope 3 is becoming very complex, because you're talking about our supply chain, logistic, our employees. And there, I have to say, at least 40% of the ESG regulations in scope 3 is still not clear how they can be delivered. So yeah, it's actually surprising but positive result.
That's great, thank you. So I guess coming back to one of the fundamental questions, coming back to what ESG means to different businesses, perhaps if we come back to you, Reuben, in terms of what does ESG mean for JLR?
So we've announced our reimagined strategy. Within that, at the core of that is ESG, sustainability. How we're measuring ourselves then against setting some very clear targets for scope 1 and 2. We say we're going to reduce our own emissions by 54%. We're also going to target ourselves to reduce scope 3 emissions upstream and downstream by 46%. But it's not just about CO2e and emissions. We're also looking at fundamentally change how we operate. So increasing circularity, increasing recycled content, making sure that we're clear that at end of life, what do we do with materials? Can we feed that back into suppliers? And probably the most important, the most complex area is the kind of the social governance side, making sure we're clear on what impact we're having on the supply chain, the value chain that we've got, and also that our suppliers do as well. And that's probably the biggest area that we need to focus on, because it's the one that's the hardest to really understand.
Thank you. Perhaps Alex, come to you.
Yeah, it really matters. It really matters at Volkswagen Group. It matters because of the environment. It matters because of the planet. But it also matters because it's a great way to engage our employees in what we're trying to achieve, what the real purpose of the company is in terms of net carbon neutrality by 2050. So I think that's critically important, but moreover, it's also very, very important for business and for our customers. You know, as we're supplying vehicles now, customers are demanding that our products meet their own requirements as far as their ESG agenda is concerned. So it's an absolutely central part of our business.
That's great, and perhaps as well for Eman for Bosch.
You know, we started in ESG 2004 actually to work on it, and scope 1 and 2 really accredited in 2020 we were accredited, but I really wanted to mention one thing, not to be judged. There have to be an understanding from the consumers as well, because ESG is not a choice anymore. We have all to do it, and we're all working on it really hard. But when a company is only actually working in a software environment, so the technology provider and software environment, they can actually be accredited immediately. By 2030, they will be even scope 3. When you talk about manufacturing and when you talk about companies who are actually producing physical, products, really tough because you're looking on sourcing of minerals ethically, you're looking into the whole supply chain, as Reuben said, you're looking into logistic, you're looking on elements actually is not in our hands, energy. Even now, if we want to look into not having a carbon offset, there's not enough energy, green energy actually, to satisfy our demands. There's, I think in the UK, 21% if you're talking about green energy. So there are lots of elements we have to consider, generally speaking, as a company, to be able to reach net zero, but as well as a society. And I think this has to be understood, that the company is actually doing what they can and their best to reach it, but it's not one company show. It's actually the whole society show, and that needs to be understood.
No, that's great, thank you. And so what are the benefits, would you say, Reuben, or the risks of a supplier either being or not being proactive in this space?
So I'd say ESG is critical for us and critical for the automotive industry because essentially our cars are made up of thousands of components and many of them come from overseas regions. So it's really, really critical that our suppliers understand where their suppliers are making things, how they're doing things, and they're doing it in the right way, which is why we say supply chain transparency is probably the most difficult and probably the most important thing that we could be looking at in this space, because we need to make sure now, especially with up-and-coming legislation and legislation that's live in the US at the moment as well, the UFLPA legislation, that we really do understand where our components come from, how they're being made, all the way through down to mines. And that's something that as an OEM, we've never really had to do. Obviously, we've got policies, we've got very clear instructions for our supply base to say this is how we want you to engage with your suppliers, this is the way that we want you to do it. We've got supplier code of conduct that we expect everyone to follow. But now we actually have to make sure, we want to make sure that is actually being followed, which means that you have to have much more involvement through that value chain, through the supply chain, to understand how it's being done, where it's being done. And that transparency piece is a huge question and a big challenge for us.
And perhaps the same question to you as well, Alex.
In terms of the benefits, well, I mean, essentially, it's not a choice. First of all, it's not an ethical choice. I think that's clearly understood. But also, if you then look at the business benefits, increasingly, if you want to be selling your products in the quantities that you want to be selling your products, then you need to be demonstrating that you take ESG extraordinarily seriously. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that the fleet industry in the UK is absolutely at the vanguard of wanting to know what the people supplying their vehicles and the services that they buy are doing in terms of ESG. So that's not a choice; it's an obligation, not just ethically but commercially. But also, I think it goes further than that into the purchasing frameworks that we have in this country. If you want to be supplying vehicles to the public sector under the CCS framework, then you need to be reporting the relevant parameters of your Scope 3 emissions, etc., etc., etc. So it's becoming more and more ingrained in your ability to do business is now more than ever, and it will increase, but now more than ever defined by your approach to ESG.
And perhaps, Eman, as a tier one, in terms of how you treat the tier twos, do you still, I guess, measure people by the same that you are measured by? Yes,
so it's all cascaded, isn't it? So the OEMs now, the contractual vendors, what we're having in place is already have a caveat and a conditions to be ESG ready. And so this is embedded in our contracts. That goes to the contractual methods to the T2 plus. And so it's already embedded as a process. But I think what I wanted to point out here is that if it's embedded doesn't mean that the tier 2 plus, they will be able to do it. So in my opinion, on this journey, probably there will be some suppliers will disappear because, the financial issues. I mean, for us, just to be accredited to Scope 1 and 2, it took us more than 1 billion from a cost perspective to change our processes, etc., and also the product portfolio moving forward. But I also wanted to point out that there's another landscape we cannot influence at all, is actually the whole net zero landscape. So you get targets, which is by 2030 we need to be net zero, then you get targets by 2035 we need to be net zero. So there is no alignment in the policy landscape, which does influence and impact absolutely the ESG agenda moving forward. So I think this is something we have to point out, stability in the policy makings that actually will allow us from the ESG perspective to have stability in the roadmap planning. So we're all here connected. And I want actually to point out as well, because we are here in the SMMT Summit, the SMMT will publish a sustainability report next week. So please do read it. You will see exactly how the OEMs are doing a great job with, reducing the energy, reducing the mineral ethical backgrounds, sourcing, etc., and also with the pledging for the D&I. So please do read it, and please do come to the event. I think it will be published soon. So that is something you can really have a great view on what we are doing in the sustainability landscape.
That's great, thank you. I think now we'd just like to go back to questions 2 and 3 that we saw on the questionnaire that we raised earlier. So it's quite a good time to come in on that. If we can pull those up, please. So just a reminder, the second question was, do you consider ESG a strategic imperative for your business? And the second one was around, please rank the challenges or objections your business has to overcome in relation to ESG. So again, we can see there on the first one, we've got 60% saying it is already, which is great, which is positive. 25% of it will be. And then again, the lower percentages in terms of 5% no, and the 4% not sure. So again, if I could just come to you, Reuben, for some initial observations on that.
I think that's fantastic. I think 60% yes, it is already, 29% yes, it will be. That shows the motivation, the drive and the focus that's needed, because this isn't something that just will happen organically. This is something that you really have to focus on. So to see such high numbers there is really encouraging. It's really good. Yeah.
Anything else to add from Alex?
I think, seeing the data saying, yeah, it will be, I mean, I without wishing to put words in people's mouths, I'd probably phrase it slightly differently. It's like, no, it is today. You might just not be fully ready to embrace it. And seeing 5% no is also quite interesting. Obviously, we don't know the sectors that said no. But again, without wishing to sound patronising, I think it might be that it is, but it hasn't been realised yet. There are very few businesses which, well, I don't know any businesses that don't have customers, and I'm not seeing many customers now who don't have a significant opinion on ESG and make it part of their purchasing decisions.
Agreed. And Eman?
It's not choice anymore. We have all to do it. So we are in the same boat here. So there's the 5% that I totally agree with you. You don't have a choice, guys. I don't know who you are. But get on with it. So it's really, at the moment, is just how can we incentivize, the one who among us from the supply chain to do better, and how actually, as maybe is appeal to the politics. I know that there are none of them here probably today, is really to look into that and how actually could we create more friendly environment and to share data to make it possible to all.
Sure. And then in terms of the third question, if we could bring up those results. So again, a reminder around ranking those challenges and objections that businesses are facing. So we can see a real list there. I think top of there is lack of data and ability to measure. Cost, so alluding to Eman's very high figure that's cost Bosch to get ready. Again, initial observations, Reuben?
Not surprised lack of data being the top. I'd say absolutely is. And sometimes you need to think about where do you put your time, where do you put your money? Even for us, if we consider scope 3, biggest impact for us, 98% of our CO2 emissions are scope 3. We focused on just 3 key big ones. So purchased goods and services, used phase, so the emissions from tailpipe, and then transport, so upstream and downstream transportation. Trying to measure those, making sure we've got clear targets, measures, and then improving those. So focus on the key ones that will have the biggest impact for what you do is certainly the place to start.
That's great. Alex?
The bottom bar said lack of leadership, and it was a significant score. That's a bit of a worry. I think it's really important that at board level in the organisation there is directional leadership. That this is strategically critical, and if boards aren't looking at this, then they need to be. I think maybe there are a lot of boards who are looking at it and not necessarily cascading, communicating, and engaging in the organisation as to, it's not just go on the website, there's a big sustainability report, you might want to read it. It's like, okay, this lives in every process we have. It lives in the way that we assess our suppliers. It lives in the way that we communicate with our customers. It's embedded in everybody's professional responsibilities in the organisation. So when I see lack of leadership, it's a worry, because I think in some cases it might be indicative of a lack of leadership, but in other cases it's probably it's about the engagement and the communication, the awareness in the organisation, which is the secondary critical responsibility.
That's great. And Eman, anything particularly stood out for you from that?
I think, lack of data, I totally agree. I mean, if we're looking into the technical understanding of ESG and the implementations of certain processes and the energy consumption and also mineral sourcing, etc., it would be really great if we start to have, an open data platform which we can use generative AI in that side of things to actually empower patterning the information for the people to understand what needs to be done more in a specific way. At the moment, we are really doing what we can, and there are more companies advanced than others, but I think if there's a shared knowledge, which again I see the SMMT maybe here to be maybe the platform for this, and that we shared knowledge, we shared understanding, and also we create role models within the industry that can be followed moving forward. So I totally relate to this. The leadership, I agree with Alex, but maybe there could be the leadership actually from our governments as well. The leadership in recognizing the amount of support these companies really they need, the SMEs and startups, to be able to follow the path. So I think the leadership, it goes in both ways, leadership in the companies and the business, but also the leadership in the public sector, which we need we need really absolutely now to engage, to allow us to to join forces and to be on the right track.
Yeah, completely agree. That's really insightful. And I actually thought now might be a good time to actually pause and see if there's any particular questions for our panel in the audience. We've got one down here at the front.
Thank you. Simon Godwin from FINEA. Talking about leadership, what trends are you seeing in terms of board oversight in light of regulations like in the EU, you've got Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. In the US, you've got SEC climate disclosures, you've got other regulatory developments. So do you see a shift in the level and the nature of oversight of ESG in your boards and across the industry in general?
Anyone in particular wants to take that one first?
I can start. So we've got on our board we've got someone who is responsible for sustainability as part of strategy and sustainability. We've combined as a board level role, and we've done that specifically so that we can make sure that every key decision that sustainability is being considered and that's being looked at. So it's not just the traditional quality, cost, or what's the customer view, but actually what's the impact on sustainability. You're right, the legislation is increasing hugely. I think it's about a 9-fold increase since 2010, the amount of legislation coming through. And within our own business, we have to look at where is the best place for that legislation to be managed, to be maintained, but ultimately it wraps up through to the board. So we've got huge involvement from them. And I think, to be honest, that is absolutely key in being successful in this, because sometimes you have to do things that could cost money, or it could delay other things that you may think are more exciting, but actually, these are must-do things that we've got to prioritise. So you need that insight and support from the board level, definitely.
Alex?
Certainly, there's an increasing focus, massive focus on supplier sustainability management, which comes from board level, at a global level, at a local level. and we replicate that in our supplier performance management. We also have a sustainability steering committee within the organisation which assesses our own performance, has oversight of our sustainability strategy on a local level, ensures that we're concentrating on the things which have the most impact. So it was always a significant part of our agenda, both globally and locally, and that increases with every passing day.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point. We have the same. We have an ESG person who's actually is working on it on almost a division and overseeing all of these activities. But back to the regulations and also the policies. The politics need to stop using ESG and sustainability and weaponizing for their political positioning. I think we need a sustainable, long-term policy landscape. And I think this ping pong between the net zero between 2030 to 2035 and back and forth, it really doesn't help. So stop weaponizing it, be technology neutral, let the market be organized for the business, and create incentives for the consumers actually to be able to satisfy the market demand. And I think this is exactly what we need to achieve. And I'm maybe like a broken record. We have all to join one path, and we have all to be together to achieve the ESG. Otherwise, it will not happen, or it will not happen in the speed what we need.
That's right. I think actually just wanted to dive into detail and perhaps ask you in particular, Reuben, as kind of a manufacturer here in the UK, what should your suppliers be actually measuring, and kind of what standards do you expect them to work towards?
Yeah. So I guess start with the obvious ones, scope 1 and 2 CO2 emissions, measure them, understand what you are emitting yourselves, track them, commit to reduce them, measure them, and make sure you're being audited and you're being checked. Look at your scope 3. That's where certainly for us our biggest impact is, and for manufacturers that's a huge amount. So what's the carbon within the products you purchase? What is it then when you're using it or when it's being used? And again, track it, measure it, reduce it, commit to be checked. But again, don't forget about things like circularity. What's the recycle? If you're producing a product, what's the recycled content? Can you increase that? Because that's normally a very good way to reduce your carbon, but also potentially security of supply, because it could be you're using a material that's more local, that's closer to your factory. And then finally, the ESG side. So in terms of ESG side, the social governance side of ESG is absolutely critical. So make sure you're mapping your supply chain. Find out where those. I keep saying this like maybe, but find out where your components, where your materials are coming from. Make sure you know who is doing it, how they're doing it, because they have to be compliant to all of the legislation for you to be compliant, for then your customer to be compliant. So it's a really, really key chain. And there is going to be a huge amount of focus on this over the next 5 to 10 years. And if I'm honest, if companies don't really respond to that, then they're going to really, really struggle, because other companies that do, that will be a fantastic opportunity for them, because if they can prove that they've got transparency in their supply chain, that they know where things are coming from, how it's being done, and it's in a completely compliant way, that's going to be a very big plus for manufacturers like ourselves and other companies, because we want to prove that to our customer that we've got that very much into hand as well.
Anything else to add, Eman, to that? As again another...
Exactly the same messaging as Reuben said. One thing is actually, one of the elements of the ESG is society, and also D&I agenda. And I want to use the opportunity actually to mention the pledge, which was actually organized from the SMT. So we have at the moment 25 companies agreeing to be a part of this pledge. So if you didn't sign up yet for the D&I agenda, please do. This is an appeal which will, as I said, we're really very keen to have more companies on board. 25 is probably, and plus I don't know what the number is, but if you're not signing up, please do that. But other than that, I think, only one point is we need to create probably a community where we can share data and we could share knowledge. And I think what Reuben said is absolutely spot on, but it's just how can we get together? How could we be help to each other?
And perhaps, Alex, just focusing perhaps now more on the DEI aspects, I guess what are your priorities as a business? And again, what do you expect of your suppliers in that space?
I mean, our priorities as a business is really, or our priority is really straightforward, and that's to be the most inclusive automotive company in the UK. Recently, we were accredited by Inclusive Employers as having gold accreditation, which was great. There's more than 15,000 words of solid, hard evidence provided by us in order to obtain that accreditation, which we were very proud of. We have, I mean, it started back in, I guess, in earnest, it started back in 2015 with a focus on gender diversity, and then widened in the subsequent years to cover all protected characteristics. And we have employee network groups now in the organisation which cover all protected characteristics, which are really a driving force behind the inclusivity in the organisation. It comes from a very, very strong internal focus. So, you know, we're now 31% of our leadership positions in the organisation are female colleagues, and we've got now a 48-52 female to male overall gender split in the organisation. We measure every element of representation. That for me is the really key point. If you measure every element of what you are trying to achieve, you give yourself a chance of putting in the policies, the interventions, the activities, the cultural change, which will get you there, or at least get you moving rapidly in the right direction. As far as our suppliers are concerned, we do correspond with our suppliers to ensure that DE&I is part of the supplier selection process now. That will be fully embedded by March 2025. But it's also part of supplier performance management with our top 70 suppliers now. So that's evidently moving in the right direction. We in the day-to-day operations with our suppliers. You're going to get me in stereo now. In day-to-day operations with our suppliers, we also feel free to challenge. So, for example, on our apprentice program recently, we're not particularly pleased, not particularly satisfied with the level of representation of protected characteristics within our apprentice population. So we challenged our supplier using our data, using their data, to change the recruitment processes, to have anonymous CVs, for example, to ensure better geographical representation, better socio-demographic representation. But the key message is, whether it's yourself or whether it's your suppliers, set your stall out to measure what you want to change, and then you are giving yourself a chance to take the right actions.
That's great, thank you. Conscious of time, but it would be really useful if perhaps you could give like one top tip to the audience here as to what if there's one thing they do today or tomorrow, what would that be? Perhaps I'll come to you unfairly, Reuben, first.
Okay, I'd say make this part of everyday business. You're all leaders in this room. If there is a leadership problem, then challenge that. Use the discussion today to really take that back into your own companies and your own businesses to challenge that. What's clear, what we talk about a lot is, what is being measured will make a difference. Think about how you can apply that. And I'd say, think about where you can make an impact. Where you spend your time, where you'll spend your money is critical. It's difficult for everyone, and we can't do everything at the same time, we know that, but you can make a difference. And some of the things are actually quite interesting, quite high impact. On the social side, we're involved a lot with various charities, with various NGOs. Think about how you can interact, how you can make an impact from that social side especially. For example, UK Armed Forces Week this week, since 2015, we've now got 1,500 ex-servicemen coming into our business. Simple things like that, making sure that those people that have got great skills can apply them in a different application. It's not just about overseas, it's here as well. So think about what difference you can make and really apply that, I think is my key.
Eman?
It's not a choice anymore, but look at it as an opportunity and look at that. You could be then different, and it will help you to be more competitive and bring more business, because we know that the consumers want it, and actually having an ESG, it brings, in my opinion, more business. So it's an opportunity definitely for all.
Perfect. And finally, Alex.
Set goals and engage your employees.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Firstly, thank you to all for completing those opinion polls. It's been really useful to help generate some conversation here. And then it all just leaves me to say thank you very much to my panellists here. So Reuben, Eman and Alex, thank you.